What is up, Arizona Cardinals fans? Welcome to the Redbird Reboot. Got your two co-hosts here, as always, Blake Murphy and at Pancake Soul, Marcos Labrada. And today we've got a kind of interesting show. We're wrapping up some of looking at the tape with some of the Cardinals' plays, things that are good, looking at some of the areas in the secondary and some of the coverage items. We'll talk at least a little bit about looking at the position groups that Arizona has been. People sometimes will grade it, whether it's good, bad. We'll kind of go through if it's good enough to start. If we want to sit, maybe it's a backup at least for the most part, needing a starter, and then upgrade will be in need of being able to bring in a new upgrade at the position. We'll then kind of wrap it up at the end, going over at least just some of the current NFL head coaching vacancies that are there, how some of those may affect the Cardinals within them or their division. And before we do all that, Marcos, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. This has actually been like a calm week since the the season has been over. So once the season gets over, everybody starts doing their evaluations and they start going over like what is the next step of what the Cardinals should do. Of course, sitting at the number 4 overall pick really gives us a little bit of flexibility, and having that extra first rounder, even though that first round pick is now going to be like somewhere in the late 20s because the Texans, nobody knew they were going to be that good. Um, I mean, it's still like it's time to get the off season going because football never ends. It's just a year round cycle.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. But the Texans pick, it keeps falling. We originally, Marcos, had talked about how this could have been maybe seen by people as a top five pick. Now, obviously, of course, it's gone all the way into the late 20s right now because of the Buccaneers when that pick is at 27. Jumps all the way from like 21, 22 down to 27 with that win. It's a bigger impact, I think, on Browns fans than it is on Cardinals fans. Like, you can say, credit the Texans. They bet on themselves. They not only exceeded the projections, but they were able to essentially exceed projections to the point of that pick went from being top 15 to now just being end of the first round. They end up winning another game, which this week they will go up against the number one seeded Baltimore Ravens, a much more difficult opponent. This is a spot where I just felt sorry for Browns fans because not only do you kind of ride this wave of goodwill with Joe Flacco into the playoffs, you get blown out then by the Texans. He throws multiple pick sixes. If you're a Browns fan, have to realize, gosh, not only did that team just beat our behinds, we have to now go and give them one of our first round picks, and they get to go ahead in the playoffs. There's not a lot of confidence in whether Deshaun Watson will return to his previous form that he had been at with the Texans. There's questions about the overall team as a whole. That defense is going to probably see some guys get signed away. There's another year added. It's an interesting place for them to be in, and in some cases, I think you can say, hey, Cardinals got a first round pick. It just so happens to be that maybe the best rookie quarterback performance that we've seen of all time, save for, let's say, like maybe a couple of guys like Brock Purdy or others who've kind of come in as rookies for the most part and were able to maybe make it further. It's just been a case where the Texans have looked like the staying power, and a lot of that is because they got things cemented at the quarterback position. And while that's good news for them, it's not as good news for the Cardinals.
I mean, I'm happy for them, especially since D'Amico Ryans has been a person that I really liked for a couple years now. And when I heard that there was a possibility he was going to be given a head coaching gig last year, I thought he was the one that we had to put all our marbles into because of like the leadership skills that he brings on. And he's a defensive mastermind. I mean, what is he doing with that defensive unit there in Texas with like a bunch of you couldn't even name a defender other than like Will Anderson this year, and maybe the corner that they got a couple years ago in the
Yeah,
first round. But
no,
like that,
there's
they're
good
playing
players,
hard.
Jalen Petrie, some other guys, but like you said, no household names for them for the most part besides Will Anderson. They just play hard for their coach, and that's something that's really fun to see because we've been able to experience that now in Arizona with that defense too, just not in the same winning ways as the Texans have.
No, not even. I wouldn't even say not even close because that front four has been generating some pressure that like shows like usually when you talk about elite teams, they have like at least two or three starters on that defensive unit that are either Pro Bowl or all pro caliber players, like the Eagles last year, basically. And they're generating pressure almost at that rate. And it's not just because of Will Anderson. The guy across from him, I forgot what his name was, the defensive end or the edge rusher. He's having himself a phenomenal year. He's due to go to free agency. Maybe the Cardinals should think about maybe snatching that guy up. Of course, we it kind of hurts that Matt Burke is also their coach over there after the Cardinals went ahead and just let him go, and he
Right.
went ahead and went over there and almost, I believe he was almost this close to poaching Zach Allen in that system. They got a guy that just got cut by the Cardinals who I really liked in Myjay Sanders, and he's logging in some really good snaps over there and playing really well. And I thought to myself, I don't even know why what the reasoning was behind like just cutting him all right, but I saw some playmaking ability in him, and now he's showing it off with the Texans. I'm like, there goes another, could have been, should have been,
Hmm.
but hey, he's gone.
Yeah, and I think scheme fit with him at least has been a huge thing that we've seen with a lot of players. Cardinals have seen with how quickly that has been able to take some of the players that they've had that have exceeded on other teams and other teams who've been able to come into Arizona and have good seasons outside of that. I think it's interesting with this pick to be able to look at where kind of the drop off for talent is as far as good or bad. There's different spots and areas you want to be in for the NFL draft. With a quick screen share here, we'll just take a look at Tankathon.com's mock draft. So one of the tiers that I think we had talked about was around pick 3 or pick 4, because one way or the other, if there's 3 quarterbacks who right now are being projected to kind of go in the top 5, you get the best player in the draft there at 4. Or if a team like the Patriots, or let's say that the Bears trade back a spot, decide to roll with Justin Fields, which I don't think we expect at this point. It just feels like there's too much that probably is going to push a different quarterback there to Chicago. There's a really good chance then that if that's not the case, some team will trade up to that 4th overall pick. So that was one kind of the tiers. The other tier, when you look through of other places, was probably in the top 10. You could see like how Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, Olu Fashanu, even with Dallas Turner, a lot of people have him as edge 1. Some people have Laitu Latu, at least out of UCLA. You also had Odunze as the second wide receiver, and then Joe Alt basically finishing out the top 10. That was kind of the second cutoff tier of there's the, I think you could say, top player, top talent overall in the draft is in the top 4. You get kind of one of those blue chippers within the top 10. And if you wanted to get a quarterback, you had to pick top 2 or maybe even top 3. So Cardinals don't get that. A lot of people projected to be top 5. So then you look at, well, where is kind of those next tiers for what happens with the pick afterwards? And looking into around the top 10 to top 15, you got some other edge rushers. You're able to see like another right tackle, and J.C. Latham and Amarius Mims may have a run there. Fuega, another type of run. And it kind of is finished where a lot of people have not liked Kool-Aid McKinstry as much as others. I do think that the Alabama corner, Arnold, is actually going to probably be going a bit higher. So that's going to be at least a bit more interesting. After that, you're talking about the Cardinals going back even another tier. So you can see this is where Cooper DeJean, Terry, and Arnold, I think that there is a chance they could go a bit higher. So you're talking more about some of that second tier of edge rushers. You're talking about Braylon Trice being down there. You're talking about some offensive linemen such as Graham Barton, Jordan Morgan, Kingsley Sumataya at BYU, and then maybe 1 or 2 defensive linemen like JT Tuamolo. I think he may be going back for another year to Ohio State. I think that he didn't officially declare. I'll double check on that. But that's what you're looking at if you're Arizona. Marcos, do you feel like the Cardinals with this, is it a missed opportunity, or do you feel like that the team is just going to kind of roll with it and is still going to be able to have a good player there? Or let's say that you look at those 3rd round picks, is there talent that they should try to make a move up from that Texans pick to get? What are some of your thoughts there based on what we know about Arizona finishing somewhere in this kind of bottom third of the NFL?
I think we can. I think in this circumstance, we're probably just best off sticking and picking in this little area, especially with that offensive tackle being available late in that first round. I believe this is an interior offensive tackle, so this guy can move from tackle to interior, and interior is what we need first and foremost. So if we can get ourselves a first rounder when it comes to like a interior offensive lineman, that probably would bode well. I know that that's like going back back-to-back offensive picks in the first round. But we all know that, like, the biggest guy, the biggest name to our but what we're looking forward to is just Marvin Harrison Jr. And if you get somebody like that, he's probably your starter for the next 14 to 15 years if you're able to keep him. Um, and for that second first rounder, you're just pretty much just playing with like house money at that time. And if you can get yourself, I mean, we all know that this order is going to be way different, especially later in the first round. Things could change, especially after like the draft. I mean, not draft. The combine happens, and then free agency happens. So I I mean, I'm good with whatever we get in this later on this first round, as long as it's interior offensive lineman or I mean at least a top interior offensive lineman, maybe the top center or somebody that can play center, or I mean a cornerback or an edge rusher. I mean at that point we're still having first round talent, and in the beginning of the second round, which we're gonna pick high in, that's always a fringe first round pick that like
Mm-hmm.
maybe got pushed out of the first round. Could have been for a majority of reasons. So if you do that, a lot of teams actually make their money and that top of the second round, still getting that first round talent, like the Steelers did last year when they got Joey Porter Jr. in the second round.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good thing I think for context is like you're saying about how things can change. This year, at least, is a good mock draft from last year about this time, and you can see kind of the trend that goes on. Whereas you've got the two quarterbacks going 1 and 2, the teams at least they had projected trades. Obviously, one of those teams actually didn't trade up, despite there being talk about it. It was actually the Panthers. Indianapolis Colts does get a quarterback. It's just not C.J. Stroud. Cardinals, they have sticking and taking Jalen Carter, who had an interesting rookie year. I think that he hit the wall as far as conditioning, but I got to see at least it was a different trade up for Will Anderson here. What's interesting is you look at and see one of the trends that you see of mock drafts at this time of year versus later is that some players who are kind of projected as the top players are going to fall. Whether or not that's fair or not, some people like Christian Gonzalez, until he got hurt, was probably the best corner in that class. Will Levis fell all the way to the second round. There's quarterbacks that can fall, which is something to watch. There's also pass rushers like Miles Murphy. Teams were not as high on him. He ended up falling later in the draft. But other players like Bijan Robinson, you can at least be able to see. Kalijah Kancey's been a good player. He just went a bit later. And then you can still see Broderick Jones, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, Peter Skoronski, Lucas Van Ness. All of those guys are like top 15 picks. And you can see early in the mock drafts, top 15 talents. That's something, Marcos, that I think when you're talking about the idea of a first round talent, these are guys that their stock usually doesn't change as much as I think, where they're not falling all the way to round 3, round 5. There's not guys that are like maybe projected as third round picks who will rocket up into there. A lot of times teams will just know who kind of those top guys in college are. And then it's just more figuring out what does the team fit look like. So if you look at where the Cardinals are currently projected, like last year, you get to see that there were guys like Trenton Simpson, Clemson's linebacker, who's actually played probably better than a lot of other linebackers have, unfortunately, just because the Cardinals, like I think the joke was the Cardinals had taken a different Clemson linebacker. You had an offensive starting guard in Osiris Torrance, and you got guys at least for some edge rushers and some safeties. Rashee Rice ended up actually going a later round as far as it went, but this is kind of like the early perception if we're looking through. We know when it came to the actual 2023 NFL draft, things shifted a lot differently, and it was more like we've seen those mock drafts will kind of catch up to where the actual mocks will go. So, for example, in 2023, you look around that same area, you get good players like the Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison are a little bit higher up. You get to see Anton Harrison, at least, who started for the year. Guys like Miles Murphy, Brian Breezy was really good. Even like you said, a Joey Porter Jr., a Sam Laporta, tight end, a Steve Avila, who played very well this year overall. I think what it goes to say is that the Cardinals are probably not going to get that top 15 lock, but they are probably going to at least get a player who's able to go out, be a good starter for them. If they decided they want to trade up for one of those top 15 guys that they have on their board, I wouldn't mind it, but it does feel like at this spot that you're probably caring more about that number 4 pick than you are about the overall place of where the Texans finish. Let's go over and just talk about some film now with a little transition away. We'll be able to have more of a draft show, I think, coming up in the future to talk about that, especially if the Texans pick is official by next week. So, Marcos, we want to talk through some film that we were able to see on the defensive side of the ball going up against the Seattle Seahawks in that last game of the season.
So this is something that I like to try to point out to or try to teach people like how to be able to identify this. So Blake, you can obviously see there's basically two lines on this defense, right? You have the one that's on the line of scrimmage, which you have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. You have eight people threatening to blitz, and then you have the corner that's up on the wide receiver, and then you have your second line. Usually, like this is clearly indicator cover zero. This is how it is with most defensive units. Sometimes they'll have their linebackers kind of being in the second level, but they're in a way kind of like they're they're pointing their hips towards the quarterback. So in the last year during the Super Bowl, Jonathan Gannon called the cover zero on that touchdown that was allowed by the Eagles against the Chiefs on that play that's called corn dog, which they motioned. I forgot what his name, Sky Moore, was inside, and they put him back outside. Right before that, they were able to identify it as cover zero. So there's many indicators to be able to say like, oh, this is cover zero. So when you see the play kind of come out, like obviously Geno Smith gets the indicator. You're showing blitz right here. You see the safety come down to take the number 2 at the bottom of the screen right before they send everybody to blitz. He has to get moved off his spot right there. Geno Smith had to throw it kind of off platform. So I love when they get this aggressive, and especially in certain times. And if you look at number 44, which is Owen Papel right here, like this is, I think, where they could pick up where they left off with Isaiah Simmons when it comes to blitzing, because these guys are supposed to be like really talented blitzers. Not so much. I don't like what I saw coverage wise from Papo, but I know that he can be a great blitzer because of his physical makeup. So one of the things that I wish they would do constantly is just keep doing that. But of course, that led to an incompletion. So that was something I wanted to spotlight here because looking forward, this is where the league is trending to. It's trending towards two different types of coverages. You have your cover zero, and you have your cover zero going into whatever look they need you to look into. So you start off in cover zero, but then you bail out into a coverage. Or you have a coverage call, and then you do creeper blitzes where you blitz them from the second level. And so you're trying to do a design where you're trying to hide it. But like this is obviously being that it was in the Cardinals territory, this was a make and break play, and so big ups to them. I'll go ahead and cover another one, but we'll do that in a different segment. But I wanted to highlight some things that I saw that I really liked from the defense. Obviously, I'll bring offense whenever I see something that I really like.
No, that is, I think, really cool. It's fun also to see how the Cardinals' cornerback room changed over time. Because Cardinals, your best case scenario is you can get pressure with 4 guys and then be able to have extra coverage on the back end. You still need to generate pressure, though. And I think that's really cool to see how the Cardinals started out with Marco Wilson having Hamilton in the slot, and were able to kind of finish with putting Antonio Hamilton in more of a position to succeed there. That's pretty cool. Is there any other film clips you want to go over today, Marcos, at least just to kind of check and see what we had for one of the things I liked about the Cardinals by the time they ended the season was that there was a lot of physicality. The Seahawks were a team that started off running the ball very well, and at the end of the day, they really didn't finish well down the stretch. And I think that's something with Arizona that we can kind of talk about how there's been some good looks we've been able to at least see in the play and pass and run game, at least, that they've been able to have.
Well, this one I shared with Twitter. So this is the one where I showed about Keitrell Clark. And the reason why I shared this one, it wasn't because of like I wasn't trying to showcase Keitrell Clark so much that I actually got the coverage wrong, and then I corrected myself mid like posting this up. So look at that, how that's a chevron that's being formed. You see like the DBs on the outside, you see the safeties in the inside, like you have them in a triangle formation with just one linebacker. This is supposed to be a Tampa 2 tell, like right off the bat. You think they're gonna go into a look where they're gonna have a pull runner, which is always the linebacker. It could be a DB, it could be an apex defender, which means it just could be a linebacker, edge, or even a safety or a slot cornerback. Anybody could do this from any position, and they could even be This is one of those looks where you can have a cover zero look, and then they go into a Tampa 2 look. So the pull runner is the guy that just runs up field in the intermediate middle. It's just one person. Everybody else is kind of like it kind of looks like an arrow or like a chevron from there, and then you have your two high safeties. So I got this wrong, and this was actually half quarter quarter, not quarter quarter half quarter quarter. And the reason why I was able to tell this was because right when they're about to go into their snap, like right about here.
Mm-hmm.
So this looks like Tampa 2, right? You have your intermediate guy, he's dropping down. That guy isn't handling the intermediate middle. That guy's shading towards the field side. So the field side has four defenders. They have like this thing called a box formate, like a box coverage, and then on the boundary side, which if you look at the short part of the hashes, there's only three defenders, and they're forming like a cone. And the reason
Yeah,
why
the middle defender in the middle of the field dropping back. And this again is, I believe, is this first and 10 or third and long? I have to remember what the down and distance is with that one.
they never tell me on of course you got the good version, but like they never tell me on this basically. But on this down and distance, I thought this was Keytrell's like I thought Keytrell messed up because in a Tampa 2 call, Keytrell's supposed to be manning the flat. So if you look at where the running back releases to, he releases to the flat. I don't know why it's taking a while for this thing to. There we go. So he releases to the flat and nobody's there essentially just for the linebacker and whatnot. So I thought that was a mental mess up by Keytrell Clark. That wasn't his fault actually. Once I got the call corrected, which is what's important about looking at plays and looking at him again, is what led to that, because we talk about how like Keytrell Clark isn't getting any snaps or he's getting benched constantly. Why is that? And I thought to myself, maybe these are the mental errors right here. But he was actually going to his deep quarter on his side, and then he just flipped his hips and then came down and make the tackle. That's just linebacker not being able to keep up with the flat, which is a running back here, and it's Josh Woods of all people out there. And it's just like when you talk about modern defenses and you need linebackers to cover, when he can't even keep up with his running back, you kind of want to go into a situation where, and of course you have number 10. No, that's number 18. That's Ojulari.
Ojulari.
Yeah,
Yep.
Ojulari. So he's dropping into that area too because he has to also drop into coverage in that situation as well. So this basically the flats being manned between Ojulari. Actually, it's Ojulari. So see, I messed up right there too. So this is just Ojulari just being coverage and.
Well, and I think that was a great example if you go back and look at that one to begin the play right here. If you pause that,
you can do it.
Oh yeah, Ojulari. He is right now having to basically play two types of coverage. This is partially a great play call in one way, at least by there, and it's also made better by, like you said, the lack of burst overall with Arizona. So Ojulari's lining up across from the tight end. You can see Josh Woods is basically having to kind of read with the center of the field as well as where the running back goes. Ojulari's goal is to try to make things as hard as possible for the quarterback to complete this pass. So you can see here the tight end releases. If he just goes and tries to rush the passer from here, then we know on the back end with like the quarter, I think it was a quarter half you said that's being played, then Keytrell is going to then have to either come up to then make that, and then the other player have to come up. That's a pretty easy completion for Matthew Stafford. What he does here is you'll be able to see that he basically will drop back in and kind of get in the way of the quarterback, where if he tries to just dump that over to the tight end, he's going to be able to, you can see at least right over here with the side. If he tries to just to dump it over to that tight end, he's going to get in the way where he could then pick it off if need be. So if you look at where the linebacker goes, the linebacker's trying to follow with Puka and the others. Ojulari ends up being the one who picks him up, but he's the guy who's getting in line to make sure that tight end, when he goes up the field, that he's just not going to boom, hit that. So he actually does a really good job here. This is just a play of where you're talking about Sean McVay. He's looking and saying, hey, I've got a running back in coverage over with a edge rusher in coverage. That's a pretty easy call for Matthew Stafford to read the coverage, look and say, hey, if I'm going to throw that ball deep to that tight end, there's guys over the top, there's guys underneath. If I go and check it down to the running back, then the running back at least has a chance to pick up that first down. Keytrell comes off of there. It's one of those things of where sometimes when it comes to these different play calls, you're not going to be able to sometimes have every rep go perfect, but I do agree with you here. If there's one thing that you could change in looking at that linebacker, him being able to have to kind of see what his read is for the most part under the play action and then backing up into his zone, he's not able to have enough burst to be able to kind of either close immediately and get down there on the running back or recognizing the play call. That's one of the things we've seen in the past of when Buda Baker has the instincts or reactions. Sometimes he'll go back and drop it, and he'll immediately know, oh, I know where the ball's going from film study. They're going to go right to the running back, immediately shifting, going down there. It's one of the places of where when you see how some of the coverage is called, you can say that a good play call usually beats good coverage every time. It's the same way of, hey, you can throw up a 50-50 ball that may be perfectly covered, and the wide receiver takes a 50-50 ball and turns it into a 70-30 ball because they can just wrestle that ball away from the defender. That's part of where I think that I agree with you of seeing some of these concepts and seeing guys have good coverage to stop those. With Vance Joseph, we would see a lot of times plays under play action that got blown wide open, like those bootlegs or guys are just some blown coverages. We can still see that with Arizona, but it is nice that we can at least see, like you said, some discipline and responsibilities within some of these coverages.
Yeah, if like an advanced Joseph system, Ojulari would be trying to shoot up the field, and then he would chip whatever tight end is across from him. So the tight end would chip and just get past them and stuff. That's the reason why those bootlegs are always successful because they do a thing called boxing in the run. So they're just trying to push the outside zone to the inside to try to get him to the teeth of the defense. The only way to do that is if you have your linebacker shoot a field. But if you commit to doing that, then it's susceptible to like bootlegs, which is why I keep saying when he talked about the boot and he said that, I think to myself, you're the one who implements the scheme, which you want your linebackers to do that. So they can't do two things at once. You can't ask Zaven to shoot a field and then have him cover the tight end after he chips them. So in this instance, you see some coverage responsibilities here where you see Ojulari, and I know it's kind of bad to say that's an outside linebacker in coverage, but that is what these coverages ask your linebackers to do. Somebody has to cover the flat because if nobody covers the flat, that's a 20-yard gain right there. And I mean, it's a 10-yard gain, but trust me, it could be a lot worse. I got maybe one more, and I wanted to show this in respects to you, Blake Murphy, and the run defense when it comes to like Zaven Collins. So let me go ahead and put that one up there. That one, I like what Zaven did against an all-pro tackle in Jordan Mailata. So we'll go ahead and go over that.
Fantastic. All right.
All right. So right here, you have, if you see at the bottom of the screen, you see Zaven Collins, and then you see 68 Mailata, and he is backing that guy up right here into his own running back, where the running back had nowhere to go. And then you talk about boxing the run. That's what it looks like right there. But this is just pure man versus man right here, where he's holding his block, making sure he gets contained, and then forces number 0 to go back into the teeth of the defense. So when we look at his run grade, part of this is because of this. When they run to his side, he can hold his block, maintain his block, and it doesn't matter if it's an all-pro tackle going up against him. He gets his arms under that tackle's shoulders. He pushes him back. I mean, we know that he's a mammoth of a person that has like the ability to move. Well, there's a first-hand example, which is why they probably thought to themselves, why not let's try this guy at edge? But yeah, you've been mentioning before, like, hey man, he's a good run defender.
Yeah, especially when, like you're talking about, you see there the entire approach is for that. I think, like you said, like being able to run the outside zone where they're running the ball to the left, and the goal is for 68 to get his hands on him, and then for Swift to either try to bait to run inside and then boom go around outside the edge, or if the edge is being able to be contained, you get your offensive tackle blocking that guy out of the way. It gets a lane for him to go in and read. And there is just nothing there because Zaven just holds up on the edge and does it such a good job where he can't run around into the back without having to go back around his guy. And he can't cut upfield because Zaven's able to kind of push him right into where he needs to go. And that allows the other guys to clean up the tackle. And this is where, like, well, you can box score scout at times. The film will show a lot of times where a lot of the credit's able to lie sometimes, because you're going to see a tackle here by Victor Dimukeji when really it's saying, wow, Zaven did nothing that's going to show up on the box score, and yet he is like almost solely being able to like manhandle that guy so that he doesn't get free and be able to pick up those extra yards. And that's something that, like I've said, the biggest thing is that the best edges in the game are guys like a Max Crosby, where they're able to shed, be able to kind of get that pass rush effort in as well. and then be an anchor like that against the run game. One of the things, at least, that's tough to say about football players is while it may not necessarily be like that superstar type of level you're looking for, football is difficult enough, and being able to have some of those top traits are things that can get you to stick around the league for a long time. I think of the Cardinals about a few years ago. Matt Shaughnessy was a guy who, when the Cardinals signed him, I think it was away from the Raiders, he just was a stalwart on the line, was able to stop the run just pretty much straightforward. And that was all that you really needed from him. He was able to stick around as a starter at least for at least a couple years, and then went on to start for a few other teams. That's something where you can be able to make a living in the NFL by having that being a core part of a player. I think with Zaven being highly drafted, at least for some of that to just be a run stuffer, it may not live up to maybe some of the potential that was there. But in the league, you don't want to necessarily just say every player has to be a superstar or they're a bust. I think we'll have times that you'll get solid play. And this is one of those areas that clearly I think we saw in Zaven's game this year. And it's also like I've said, I don't know if I would move him back to the interior as far as being an inside linebacker versus just kind of keeping him here as a guy who can lock down the edge. And maybe you have to bring in some guys who are like more that stud linebacker type overall.
I would say if they're kind of twiddling with these linebackers that they've twiddled with this past year, I like Chris Barnes, but I'm not. I know we can upgrade at that position. Same thing goes with like Kaiser White. Maybe shouldn't be playing the mic. He didn't play the mic when he was back with the Eagles. It was I forgot what his name was. T.J. Edwards who played the mic. So they're moving him to play the mic here, and he's really undersized. So I would say maybe in that aspects, maybe move Zaven back to inside linebacker. But I love what he does here at edge when it comes to containing the run because that and then this is aside from the problems that Philly has with running outside zone from shotgun, which if you look at it just right now, look at that angle he has to take. He has to go straight into like that Zaven Collins like setting the edge right there. So there's nowhere that he can go either way. DeAndre Swift can't go to the outside. So running it from
Yep.
shotgun is already a bad concept, but Zaven
Yep.
does his job beautifully against an all pro tackle.
And I think we saw a lot of this too with, and this is something that, like, you said, there's good run games that you can have from shotgun, but if it's only from under shotgun, there are ways that teams can either scheme or players in the NFL, like, that are able to make plays like this. I do think that being able to have the ability to not just say, oh, you have to go under center, but being under center gives more options. You're able to go under center, at least be able to have some of the inside outside runs. You can drop back at least with being able to turn your back to the defense. You can run the bootlegs. So I think it's being able to not just say, well, we don't just go all the time under center, but I think you have to be able to recognize that the ability to give more things that a defense has to game plan for and stop, that's where I think it comes about being great on offense in the National Football League. And that's something that's really, I think, cool to see the Cardinals over time. That run defense wasn't great overall, and a lot of that, I think, is with the defensive tackles, but we're able to at least see some of those building blocks, I think, moving forward for next year in 2024. Let's go ahead and shift now, kind of looking at some of the Cardinals with the projections. I'm going to pull up the Our Lads depth chart for them just to kind of take a look at least with the starting positions of what they have, as well as just overall what we've seen. Marcos, we're going to go and kind of play a little, I guess you could say activity, maybe it's more of a game, where we're going to say, all right, so the current Cardinal who's in that spot, do we say that they're a starter? If we're a current Cardinal, do we say that they need to sit or more of a backup? Like, which means backup sometimes will end up having to play or having to start. It's like they're good enough to stick on the roster. And then upgrade, that's where you got to go out. You got to bring somebody else in. Let's go ahead and just start with going in order here with the wide receiver spots. I'm going to make sure I get this screen a little bit bigger for you guys to be able to see. But let's go ahead and talk about the start sit for when it comes to Michael Wilson. Do you feel like that the Cardinals with Michael Wilson, I feel like this is a place where I would say we've seen enough from Michael Wilson to say that I probably would say start would be the best thing for him, but I would want to bring someone else in as a veteran who would probably be able to sit versus keeping Zach Pascal in that role. What are your thoughts, at least, with Michael Wilson for start, sit, upgrade?
I would say start. I'm a big Michael Wilson person. I love what he brings to the table. Obviously, we're going to have to sign a veteran behind him. So I would say definitely. I mean, without a doubt, you need to give him a snap. So I would say start for him.
Yeah, let's go. With Greg Dortch, I think this is probably an easy one for us over there. With he's listed as the right wide receiver because Hollywood Brown is out. When it comes to Hollywood, do you feel like that's a start, sit, or upgrade type of position? Because I think based off of where it is with the money, you're kind of hovering in that you don't want to say sit. He's probably good enough to be a starter, but from what we've seen this year, I feel like you can probably get a cheaper upgrade, especially with that number 4 pick, if that is what the Cardinals do. So I think you would probably say, hey, let's take Greg Dortch, move him into the slot, start him. Rondale, I think you probably would look at sitting. He would probably have to be a backup. And then upgrading, you'd probably want to get a different receiver outside of Hollywood Brown, I think would be what I would do. Do you have any differences you'd have there?
I agree with starting Dortch, especially at the slot. I think obviously he makes the most out of his snaps, and we've seen that this year. Rondell Moore, he has possibly some playmaking. Uh, he has some playmaking abilities. There's no doubt. He caught a couple like post or 9 routes for the Cardinals, especially like a few for a touchdown. I think it was one against the Texans and another one against the Steelers. I'm not sure. So, anyways, he can go deep, but you don't see enough of that, especially with the fact that they're just using him as a gadget player. So if they're using him as a gadget player, he has to kind of sit. And Hollywood Brown, I mean, I've been against like wanting to bring him back, and the reason why I want to be against bringing him back is because not only is the money going to be projected as high, but you're taking away snaps from a person like Greg Dortch because of draft status and because of name. Hollywood Brown, you're not going to have him be a bench player making $12 million or $8 million. You're going to have to give him a snap to justify that. But he's been injury prone, and when you go ahead and I've seen a bunch of like these snaps, and I've compiled a bunch of these snaps with Hollywood Brown. There's just no connection between him and Kyler Murray. It's just weird. They're best friends and they have no connection.
Yeah, it's whether it's just the injury, the time, some of the other places, it just has not been the same since that early 2022 stretch where the offense was pretty broken, but Kyler to Hollywood seemed like it wasn't. And then this year, whether it's health or something else would be there. I think that the best answer probably is that you could see if Hollywood would take a 1 year deal to come back. I just think that he will be able to get a lot more on the open market because there's not that many free agents this year. And I think that if you slide Rondale behind Greg Dortch at least as that sit role, that's what I think you would do there. So you probably have to bring in at least one veteran and maybe even a second draft pick at receiver for the most part because this is going to be, I believe, the last year, I think at least, because Rondale was a rookie in, unless I'm mistaken, it was 2021. So he's entering the last year of his deal with Arizona. If they're able to find an upgrade, he may end up being a guy who looks for another team. We'll see what happens with him in camp. Let's go to the offensive line. You've got Kelvin Beachum over here, and I think this is a pretty easy sit. He's a guy that you don't want to have as a starter long term, but he can come in and start if you've got short term types of injuries. With the Cardinals having DJ Humphries under contract, I think that you would probably look at this spot as saying Kelvin Beachum would start. DJ Humphries, if you can upgrade, I think that you do. And the best way you do it is you might just take Paris Johnson and move him over to that left tackle side. What are your thoughts on the tackles for sit, start, and upgrade?
I think it's kind of weird that they have Beecham manning the left tackle side, and then they have uh, Paris Johnson doing the right tackle side. So yeah, I would flip them around to be honest with you. And I don't know. I think when it comes to like DJ Humphreys, I I don't know if they're going to be done with him. But when it comes to cap space and whatever has to come with it, I think they're just going to go through the draft to upgrade.
Yeah, I could see that being with the draft upgraded, and it wouldn't shock me if they also bring in a veteran, someone who's familiar, like with Jonathan Gannon with company. I think that that's kind of another spot that we could see updated. It would not shock me if the Cardinals' second first round pick, if they go, hey, we really need to get our tackles settled. We need two tackles. Monty's talked about that a lot. It would not shock me if they say we got to push defense off a little bit just to make sure that we've got our quarterback protected. Guard spot, Elijah Wilkinson and Will Hernandez. This, I think, is pretty easy. I think Will Hernandez, obviously, that's a start. He at least has been stalwart there. You're probably going to be looking at, with sitting, will probably be the Cardinals draft pick last year. I think you got to get a free agent at that left guard's position who can man that and be an upgraded starter. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we definitely need to upgrade from Wilkinson. He played well towards the end of the season, but this is where I think we should try to go high in the draft to try to draft his replacement, especially at left guard. Because if we, let's just say we want to move Paris Johnson over to the left tackle side, he has to have a good like Robin to his Batman on that side, which is usually the left guard, to be able to help him. When it comes to manning, handling like stunts and whatnot. So that position right there, I think we can get away with trying to draft high and then putting somebody there to start. I don't know about free agency wise. I don't know if we're going to be
Yeah,
in
we've
reach.
we've got a couple of guys at least that are free agents, like Andrews Pete, Connor Williams is at Miami. There's a couple of people like Vaitai I know is with Detroit. Dalton Risner's played guard before as a free agent. Like you said, this wouldn't shock me if we end up seeing the Cardinals sign a veteran to a 1 year deal, and then I think that you could probably see that drafted somewhere on day 2 or 3, maybe even with that third round pick. Because otherwise, I think you probably have your guy who's going to be the backup at center and at left guard, and I think that guy on the roster could be John Gaines. If his health is in question, that's going to be another thing that we'll find out. But right now, at least, that is like you said. It does feel like at least one of the other offensive line spots, because of what we've seen with Humphreys and because of the age, is probably going to be addressed somewhere through the draft, just depending on if that's going to be a first round pick or later. Tight end, this I think is pretty easy. Jeff Swaim was on a 1 year deal. He is out at least with a pretty serious injury. I think you're probably going to say that Trey McBride is a start. It's one of the easiest starts on the team. Elijah Higgins, I think, is a sit. I think that you probably would want to say that there's enough that we've seen from Higgins that I think you could say, hey, we can get another blocking guy overall, put Higgins into that role. Maybe you can draft a late round tight end to be kind of just that blocker, who maybe is going to be an athletic guy who can be maybe a tight end fullback type of player. I don't think you need to do as much, though, with Trey McBride being able to block and play. You're probably looking at that as the day 3 type of thing. I think this is a start sit easily. Don't think you have to worry about an upgrade either spot.
No, what was like Trey McBride is at 800 yards. He
Sure.
shattered the Cardinals tight end record. Yeah, that's a very easy start. I the playmaking ability that he showcased in college, when I saw him getting drafted in the second round, I was like, that's gonna be tremendous if we can get that guy going here, and we got that guy going. So thank God
Yeah.
for that. So
And that's why I
he,
don't know if they'll take a Brock Bowers. Like, people have talked about the two tight end setup, but I've seen enough, at least from Trey McBride and Higgins. The issue has been more just with the outside targets versus being able to say, hey, we need to have a great, strong interior and get these two guys to run the ball. So I think that's pretty easy, I think, at least, just for that setup.
yeah, I agree. I agree that when it comes to like there maybe you could go with that two tight end setup, but I think they're gonna try to set these guys and put them out like wide and stuff in those circumstances and use them as a big wide receiver target. But like you also need your tight ends to block as well, because you need to sell the illusion that they're in there to block, so that way they can leak out and then be wide open.
For sure. All right, let's talk at least here about running back before we go with QB. Pretty easy, I think. I think this is going to be a start, sit, sit. Both of the backup running back to James Conner did well. Conner, I believe, turns 29 this year, unless I'm mistaken. So I think the question here, Marcos, is he's in the last year of his deal. You've got the two guys behind him. You could probably just argue draft a later round running back and just kind of throw a dart at the wall, see if that's someone who can come in to push the other guys. The question I have that kind of came up that was interesting is, let's say that you're picking 27th if you're the Cardinals and the number one running back in the draft is available on the board. Is that a spot where you would say, hey, we may not be upgrading, we're going to be maybe upgrading next year, but you draft that guy to sit, kind of develop and sit there behind James Conner, and then maybe you unleash him and have that guy under contract for the next 5, or with the franchise tag 6 years? Is that worth it compared to some of the other positions, though? I think this, for the most part, is a place where the Cardinals are. I think you've got probably bigger needs. I think that this could be a start, sit, sit. I don't know if I think it's the right time to upgrade, especially with maybe a pick that high.
No, I think we're good at when it comes to the running back position. James Conner had his first 1,000 yard season, and he did it in 12 games, I believe. And Michael Carter Jr. is a great pickup, and he's a good change of pace back that we've been needing in our since we let Chase Edmonds go. He could fill in that role as that new Chase Edmonds swifty, like shifty type of running back. And Demarcado is he's pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
you almost kind of like if you squint hard enough, you almost see like another James Conner out there with Demarcado. They have the same build, same run style.
Yep. Oh, for sure. All right. Defensive side. Now this is kind of like the you cross yourself or like make sure you're like trying to ward away evil because starting with left defensive end, you got to upgrade. This is one of the areas I think that we saw a lot of injuries took place, but right now, at least with Phil Hoskins and what they have, you're probably going to need to draft a player somewhere along, at least maybe not in the first round, but probably draft someone high. Probably bring in another veteran at least as well. You've got more cap room to be able to do it. Looking at the right defensive end, they had Naquan Jones and Ben Stilley at the end of the year. That's two defensive end picks I think that you're going to have to address if you're the Cardinals. I don't think they're going to shift as much to a 3-4 defense. I think that maybe there's some more 4-3 looks when they bring some guys in, but we'll see at least how that defense is on the actual line next year because every team is kind of a hybrid 3-4, 4-3. Nose tackle, Roy Lopez. With Lecky Fotu coming in, I think that he played fine, but overall, the availability, there wasn't as much draft capital. It feels like that the entirety of those first three picks are probably all upgrades. And if that's one thing that stands out, that's the first time that I think we've ever seen a single position group be like, everybody got to probably be upgraded. Maybe you could argue to sit a Roy Lopez or sit a Lecky Fotu, but I think across the board, that's pretty easy.
I, I like what I saw from Roy Lopez this year, but that's going to be a rotational type of piece. It
Mm,
not only because you want to keep him fresh, but because I didn't see too much out there to be able to say like this guy can stop the run and man that middle and control that. So basically, for just all three of these positions, I would say left defensive end, nose tackle, and right defensive end, which is just tackles and stuff. You're gonna have to upgrade all three of those positions, and that's gonna be tough to do and to do it right because you need at least one stud there.
yep. No, definitely. That's one of the things that we could see with Arizona's pick potentially, I think, is the biggest need, but we'll see how they address it in free agency as well. Linebacker, we've got Zaven Collins, BJ Ojolari. Ojolari was up there with Gardeck as far as one of the better pass rushers, but against the run, Collins is great against the run. Gardeck was not as good against the run. We also saw some play for Jesse Luketa. I think with Cameron Thomas, you're probably going to be moving on at least and looking to upgrade from that. He just did not seem like he clicked the same way in the defense. I thought that a move to defensive end could have helped him. Really feels like the Cardinals just kind of kept him in that pass rushing type of role. And this is a spot where I think if you had to look at it honestly, you would say there's probably a mix of start sit between, you'd say, starting Zaven, starting BJ, putting at least some rotational in for Gardeck. Dimukeji is maybe even up there, but you probably need to get that one guy who is able to be a stud pass rusher and can be sustainable against the run. I think that you're going to have to, at least for the most part, say it's kind of a combination of if you can get one upgrade, the rest of these guys are probably between that sit and start area.
Yeah, I actually want to see more snaps from Ojolari, but it is kind of tough, like we mentioned, because Zaven Collins has a better run stopping ability than Ojolari does. But that's the problem with Zaven Collins is he hasn't had better penetration than Ojolari has, and you're putting those guys out there because you want them to get to the quarterback. Um, Dennis Gardick has shown great pass rushing ability, so it's hard to for me to say sit on him because he has that ability, but he only gets used about like 30% of the time, I
Yeah.
believe. So they pull him out quite a bit, and they've actually had him playing coverage quite a bit this past year. They've had him dropping into zones this year, so that's kind of negated more of his pass rushing ability. So it's hard for me to say sit because I do want him to start, but I also want him to get more snaps, and I don't know if that's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, it does feel like they're so young. You want to be able to see them grow next year. I think that that probably means that you would take BJ and say that that's a starter. You probably want to get someone who can at least sit behind him who could take over. I think the same thing goes with Zaven Collins. So really, it's probably that right linebacker spot, being able to upgrade it as a pass rusher. Because then you could even have a package where, say it's on third and long, Zaven comes off the field, Gardeck goes on to rush the passer, and you've got a top pass rusher with BJ Ojolari on there. We saw that with multiple linebackers in some of those top pass rushing areas. Then having a guy who can win one-on-one matchups, I think that you're probably still needing one of those guys. We'll have to see where that comes from. if the Cardinals are not able to necessarily find that this year, you may have to see about the team either, depending if they win more games or not, if they're going to trade up for one of those guys in the future, get some draft capital, or maybe you can hit on a guy who is able to surprise. Speaking of hitting on a guy who's surprised, I would not mind putting Owen Papo in the sit place. We got to see some stuff this year. I don't think we saw enough to say that he's a starter, but I don't think we saw enough where we can rule that out and say it has to be upgraded. I think from Chris Barnes, we can say that's one's a sitting place. So I think one way or the other, if both of those guys are to sit, you're probably going to have to upgrade one of those spots. You are going to be getting, of course, one of your stud linebackers back in Kaiser White. I think that second linebacker spot is what's going to need an upgrade. After that, these other two guys I think can sit, but that really feels like that's just one linebacker that you're looking to upgrade at that position.
Yeah, see, this is tough for me because I know that Kaiser White can have starting ability, but he has starting ability at the mic right now, and he should be having more snaps at the will because that's where he flourishes mostly. Whereas at the mic, he has to be in charge of like lining people up and whatnot. So it's like a situation where it's like, yeah, you can start Kaiser White when he comes back, but he's going to be playing the mic role again. And then on the other side, Owen Papo, who needs more snaps to go out there and sink and swim. He is a guy that I think if you try to mold him, once again, just another situation where you have a linebacker that, you have all these traits with. If you're going to do something with him, you took him in the fifth round, like at least give him the snaps to try to see if he can develop because he's not going to develop on the bench. He's going to develop out there. Maybe during preseason or
Yep.
the offseason he can develop.
Yep. No, agree there. That's one of the spots at least where inside linebacker you do need good ones to be able to be good up against the run. The Cardinals this year just did not have good run defense because they didn't have talent at any of those spots. That is another spot for upgrading. I think that you do want to look to, like you said, the draft for being able to bring in a guy at least at some point. They've been able to find some late round picks at least that can start with Jonathan Gannon's guys in the past, Kaiser White being one of those guys. I think that we'll see exactly what they do and how they address the position. I think that the biggest need is going to be up front. It's going to be the defensive line versus the linebacker because of, like you said, a guy like Kaiser and because of what we've seen from Barnes and Papo. Let's go and talk now about corners because this to me is another spot of upgrade. And it's not like it's a negative in Antonio Hamilton, but I think you do need to upgrade for sure, at least at the right cornerback spot. We saw Sterling Thomas get starting snaps. He's probably better as a backup for a lot of places. I think Keytrail will be interesting to see with him if he lines up versus Garrett Williams. Williams, we saw when he played this year, he was good enough to start. The defense was much improved with him as the nickel back. Maybe Keytrail ends up coming in for some of those roles when it's going to be some quarters or having to have three corners on the field. This is another spot where I think you probably need to look at getting at least one upgrade. Maybe you run it back at least with Antonio Hamilton. You can have your nickel at Garrett Williams. If Garrett can play inside and out a bit as far as with the nickel, that's probably fine. I think you probably need at least one upgrade here at cornerback. Maybe you need a second one. I think it'll just depend on if they feel like they want to, keep Antonio Hamilton around or bring him back because we saw last year Marco Wilson was so upgrade needed that they just released him before we even got to the end of the season.
Yeah, it's a shame for Marco Wilson once again. Antonio Hamilton has been the stalwart at that position for quite a couple of years now. But yeah, we could definitely use an upgrade there. And it's weird because Garrett Williams was an outside corner, Keytrail Clark was an inside corner, like a slot corner, and they switched the roles around when they drafted him. Go figure. The Cardinals drafting somebody and then playing them out of position. So I don't know. I think I'd want to switch him back around to see what we have in Garrett Williams on the outside and Keytrail Clark on the inside because Keytrail even said he likes the challenge of being on the inside.
Yeah, and I think with the slot, like we've talked about, it has a lot more responsibility when you're playing the nickel as far as mentally you're having to be much more of reading in front and behind you because you may have to go uncover a running back and a tight end, or you may have a wide receiver who suddenly moves into the slot, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, Justin Jefferson's in here now. Great, now you got to cover that guy. I think that it's going to be interesting to see how they address this spot in particular. It wouldn't shock me if this is a pick that we would see go at late 20s or in the early second round if that right talent is there because They need to have size and athleticism at corner. Garrett Williams is one of those guys. I think at least at 5'10", 192 kind of fits that, but being able to get a corner who I think can take on some of those big one-on-one receivers and allow other slot guys to kind of take on, those other places, that would probably help. Last but not least, we've got start. Now, Budda Baker, he's getting a pay upgrade for 2024. Jalen Thompson's still under contract. This is a spot where I think it's in a little bit of a weird place because I think it's start and then I think you're a starter. But I do think you should still draft a safety because right now you've got Budda was like a nickel/strong safety. Jalen, nickel/strong safety. You don't really have that elite middle fielder type of guy. My hope had been that would have been Isaiah Simmons. Did not work out that way, unfortunately, for the Cardinals. I think that you, at least if you wanted to say the Cardinals needed to go out and get another, I don't know if you can say upgrade because I think they're fine with their starting safeties, but I do think that if you're able to go out and say, let's bring in another guy who could be more of that middle field safety, you can then move a Jalen Thompson sometimes into the nickel. As long as you got that number one type of cornerback, you're able to get a guy like that, then that's great. And it may not be in this offseason. You can only address so many needs. I would probably pour more into the defensive line and then maybe kind of make do at corner if I had to, just to make sure that the run and the pass are able to be defended properly up front. But what are your thoughts, at least, on that? Do you think that obviously they're good with their starters, or do you think it needs to be addressed whatsoever?
It's kind of so I got this theory about what happened last year. So last year they had a conundrum going into the season where they had Isaiah Simmons moving to safety, but they already had two safeties that were starters, of course. So you have to rotate those guys around in a way. So I think a easy way for them to solve that problem was just to ship out Simmons because then that way you can shift your two starting safeties around because as you can see, there's a ton of times where we saw Jalen Thompson in the slot as well. So he rotated between that and Garrett Williams, and they love to run these two high concepts. They do
The
call a lot
Vic
of cover three.
Fangio defense, as it were,
Yeah,
almost.
well, the cover six basically, which is still a cover like a too high concept.
Yeah.
So
Still
they
very
rotate
Tampa
their
2 heavy. It's funny to see the trends go up and down where it's like, hey, look, Lovey's making all sorts of plays with the Tampa 2 defense, and then it kind of goes back down again. Teams will run the ball a lot more against that. And then you'll see, hey, teams are just throwing to these speedy receivers like with Burrow, Mahomes. Teams will start playing back to take away those deep passing plays, and then the running, the teams then all of a sudden comes back into style. So I
yeah
agree with you that for this current era of NFL football, having those two safeties, it's kind of taken Budda out of some of that playmaking role, I think, in some ways. And Jalen, like we said, should have probably made a Pro Bowl this year, but I didn't fault Budda Baker for saying that because he performed less with statistically. I think he was asked to do a lot more of the heavy lifting of that coverage end for the Cardinals as part
yeah.
of that safety look.
And a lot of these guys come down and play linebacker too. When they have to shift from a two high to a one high, they come down and they sit in the box, and they're technically their linebackers or box safeties at that point. So it was just less of a headache to have to deal with three shifting around when you just have to do with two shifting around, especially if they pushed Isaiah to safety position. And once they move somebody into a position, they don't move him back from their position. You saw that with Zaven. So they weren't going to move Isaiah back to linebacker either because they wanted to see, hey, let's see what we can do with safety and let's put him at the very back end of the formations and whatnot and see what he can do coming down or seeing if he can cover the whole field. But they were like, yeah, but that's not the style we run here with
Right.
Jonathan Gannon. I run two safety systems. So it's just better for me to just get rid of that so that way I don't have to figure out what I can do when it comes to moving all three of these parts around. Just move two parts around.
For sure. Awesome. Let's wrap up with special teams. This is pretty easy. I wasn't sure where the Cardinals were as far as with moving on from Nolan Cooney. Obviously, ended up being proven wrong there. Blake Gillikin was an awesome find. Matt Prater is also a start, even with those last two missed kicks at the end of the season. I think that you just kind of trust him. We have seen that there is a drop-off point for kickers at some point. Like, it hit Jay Feely, at least, of all people, before the Chandler Catanzaro area. with Aaron Brewer being the long snapper, I don't think that there's any issues that I've had. The Cardinals honestly got really good production from their special teams this year. When it came to punt returns, we saw Greg Dortch maybe not be like this electric, like lightning type of punt return, but we saw some big returns. We didn't see him fumble. We didn't see him kind of have times where the ball, like bounced at like the 4 or 5 yard line, should have gone to it. I think you're fine there, at least for the most part. You can keep Dortch in that role. Maybe you want to add a guy if he takes on more of a role in starting with the slot, but really feels like, at least that in this exercise, if there's areas to look at, it's the defensive ends, it's the nose tackles, it's the inside linebacker. Maybe you get one corner, and on the offensive side, it's that left side of the line. And I guess you can say the left side of the receiver spot. That's a lot of needs. I think those are the positions that the Cardinals are going to target first in free agency and second with the draft. Let's wrap up today and talk about the NFL head coaching openings, what we've seen. We've got a couple of them already settled. Patriots are moving ahead with Gerard Mayo as their defensive head coach. We'll talk about him with our kind of final part of the show today, at least with some comments he made this week. He's got some play with Arizona Cardinals fans. Let's start with the Carolina Panthers. They're trying to interview a lot of people right now. This is not a highly looked at job, Marcos. I could see this being a job that's the last job to hire. What are your thoughts on with Carolina right now? It seems like they're going to want an offensive guy.
Yeah, this is not a bad situation having to do with the players. It's a bad situation having to do with the owner. They already know that whoever's going in there is going to have to deal with the owner, who's going to be very, very involved. And that's one of the things that I just get so mad about when owners have to get so involved in the process. So that's one of those situations where, like, I just pray for whoever they get. It's probably going to be a first timer. We already know that, somebody who's going to step into a coaching gig for the first time.
For sure. Vegas Raiders. This is an interesting one. I think that for them, it feels like this is going to be maybe not necessarily Antonio Pierce's job to lose, but I think that this is a Jim Harbaugh, or that's it. Like, even with Brady being there, it does not seem like that's falling in place. It does feel like that the Atlanta Falcons are closing in a lot more with Bill Belichick. That may be up to control or maybe other places. I just don't know if I see the Brady-Belichick tree ending up here. If Antonio Pierce does end up not being the guy, you would hope that would be because they're getting Jim Harbaugh. I think this is still more of Antonio Pierce, but we'll have to see how that will go. I will say, if they do end up not hiring Pierce, and Max Crosby has said he's wanted out, that's like an immediate, yeah, sure, I'd trade the 21st overall pick for 26-year-old, one of the best pass rushers in the game. He had surgery the other day. Even still, it's one of those spots of where it does feel like last time they should have stuck with the coach that was their interim coach, I believe, at least previously. I'll have to remember his last name escapes me, but he's with the Packers as their special teams coach. I think it was
Basaccia.
That's right. I think that they're going to right that wrong that they did of passing on him, and will promote from within, especially with how the Raiders finished. Chargers, I mean, it's got to be Harbaugh here, right? Like, where else would Jim Harbaugh go?
That's apparently where, that's where the stars are aligning to. And Jim Harbaugh going to Los Angeles and coaching in that teardrop stadium, and a guy like Justin Herbert as his quarterback. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd be pretty dumb for him to not want to pick up that opportunity if it's given to him.
Yep. All right, let's go ahead here now. Atlanta Falcons. We've already talked about with Belichick. I think if the move here is Bill Belichick, I'm just offering a blank bag to Kirk Cousins. He's a free agent, can't be franchise tagged. The Vikings, whatever desperation they may have, they're kind of in a little bit of a soft rebuild. As we saw, they can be competitive. They're able to win a few games this year with backups. But they're either going to have to tie themselves to Kirk, and then you can't really keep some of their other players. I think that that's a team that may draft a quarterback this year at some point, or bring in a veteran. And I think that a team that wants to go all in, with Arthur Blank wanting to get a Super Bowl before he dies, Falcons have all the weapons. They've got guys on defense. Like, that to me seems like the perfect thing to make a huge storm in the NFC this year. They can land one of the best head coaches of all time with a bunch of weapons, because in New England, Bill didn't have any receivers. He didn't have his good offensive line, didn't have a quarterback. He just has to get the quarterback in Atlanta. You give him Kirk Cousins, I think this is the perfect landing spot for him. As much as I think he should have probably seen Jerry Jones try to take him on for that team, it just is a spot where I don't think Jerry wants to, he doesn't want to mess with his control and give Bill that control.
Yeah, Jerry needs his yes man, and I mean we see him right there on the screen right there. They were talking about how they should have just launched him into the sun, and instead they just kept him because I mean Jerry's Jerry. He's like he loves the yes man, so hey, there you go.
So it is. Commanders, this seems like it's an offensive job. There's tons of money to spend. Ben Johnson said he wanted $15 million a year. They could also go after Harbaugh. I would not be shocked at least by that at all. It feels more like, though, if you're talking about what is the best opening, like this is the one. You've got a number 2 draft pick with a rookie quarterback in a draft where there's 2 rookies that everyone's sold on. You've got a bunch of cap room. You've got some weapons at receiver. Your defense needs a whole bunch of work, but you're going to be able to have that cap room to spend on it. If you can take Ben Johnson and give him here, maybe this is a spot for Frank Smith if he impresses coming from a different area. This would be another place that I wouldn't mind Mike Vrabel here as much. Vrabel really just hasn't been able to move on past the likes of Ryan Tannehill, but he coaches his team hard. Commanders need a lot of that in a coach as far as for being able to get a disciplined guy. I still lean the splashy hire here, and I think that that would be Ben Johnson.
Yeah, I why don't they just try to like upgrade like their offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy from being offensive coordinator to just being the head coach? I
Hmm.
mean, they got him in the building already, so I always thought like
That's
maybe that's
interesting.
a move.
Yeah. That could be a move. I think with their offense this year, like they threw the ball a ton. There was tons of sacks taken. There was some development we saw in the passing game, but we also saw like it's just an interesting place to be. I think that the biggest difference between those at the end of the day was it kind of depends on your quarterback. And then if you're going to trust Eric Bieniemy versus having the head coach of Ben Johnson who kind of turned Jared Goff's career around, Johnson is at least like much more respected. Although I agree with you, the problems this year were like they didn't have anybody on defense, and then they traded away 2 of their top edge rushers. So you're like, all right, this is a team that's in rebuild for the most part. It would be interesting to see a Mike Vrabel here. Honestly, I think that I would probably, if I had to make a choice, I think you could then maybe say, hey, if you can get Vrabel a great offensive coordinator here, that would be a spot that's there. I just think that this is going to be the splashy Ben Johnson type of a hire. Tennessee Titans, this could also be a spot for Ben Johnson. They made a surprising move. It seems like the head coach and Mike Vrabel and the ownership didn't get along, and the owner also kind of seemed to go with their GM again over the head coach, which we've seen a lot of times backfire. It may not with Tennessee. This is the spot that I've seen a Ben Slowick maybe the favorite for. He's at least the favorite in the betting odds. You would take away from a division rival, a guy who developed a quarterback super well in CJ Stroud. Say, hey, we got Will Levis. Go ahead and fix him. He's also a guy that's familiar with Rand Carthon from their time in San Francisco. Vrabel's a Patriots guy. Like the Cardinals having more of a Patriots type of background and more of the Stefanski type of offense. Vrabel's going to be like Patriots defense and maybe a Patriots coordinator. I think that the Titans are going to try to say we need to get an offensive guy in here just because we don't want this rookie quarterback that we traded up for to kind of go to waste. And I think it's going to be maybe a bit of a loss for them, but if you didn't trust Mike Vrabel to hire the right offensive guy, maybe that's part of why they made the move.
Yeah, you don't want to let that guy go to waste. And I mean, we saw a little bit of Will Levis that kind of shows a little promise. So what usually tends to happen is they end up like screwing up their development by not getting the right offensive coordinator out there.
For sure. Last one. This one's the toughest one, in my opinion. The Seattle Seahawks move on from Pete Carroll. It seemed like this would be pretty easy to figure out. And then, of course, Dan Quinn had a pretty abysmal showing against the Green Bay Packers in the playoff round. I could see a combination of anything from Vrabel, could see Mike McDonald potentially makes a spot here. I wouldn't be shocked if Mike McDonald gets one of those other jobs within the Titans or even, say, the Commanders' job. This one could maybe even be up to Shane Waldron, at least, who is the offensive coordinator. He's getting some OC interviews a couple of different places. Maybe if they go an offensive approach, they could look at a promotion. It does feel like that they're probably going to be trying to bring in just a new person that's familiar. I still think I'll go Dan Quinn here until seeing otherwise, but if you want to talk about being a Cardinals fan, Mike Vrabel coming into that team, whew, I would not be worried, but that would be getting another good coach into the division. Seahawks are going to interview a lot of people. This one's the one that I think is truly a mystery. Even Frank Smith, for the most part, who is the offensive coordinator for the, I think it's the Miami Dolphins. He's the guy that I could see takes on a head coaching job along with maybe I think it's the Eagles offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson. I could see one of those guys having to take on like the Carolina Panthers job. It's like when Cliff Kingsbury took over there. Like very few people wanted it. Same with how the Cardinals when they hired Steve Wilkes. That was the reputation of that spot. It wasn't considered a very good job there. This is one of the jobs that's kind of in the middle, and I'm very curious because you may end up with a really good head coach who's not going to be able to coach as a head coach this year and ends up going into the pool for next year, kind of how Doug Peterson was a little while back.
Yep. Just the Seattle Seahawks. I think they might still go the Dan Quinn route because even though they had a bad showing in the playoffs, I mean, it is the Cowboys we're talking about. Like, for some reason, there's just some bad omen about them in the first round of the playoffs. They just can't seem to get out of that first round.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it goes. They're just in a spot, too, with Geno being 34, with having pieces, but having some regression this year. It seems to me like that this felt like you could have run it back with Pete Carroll and maybe cleaned some stuff up. I just wonder, this is going to be John Schneider kind of coming in. It wouldn't shock me if they just moved with Dan Quinn coming back in over here to Seattle. You just wonder at least, and this would be kind of the thing for Cardinals fans, like Dan Quinn didn't work out in Atlanta. He's had a great defense with a lot of talent over there. It would just be an interesting move because like I wouldn't know whether to consider if it would work or not again for the second time in Seattle. I'd be really interested to see. Let's go ahead here and the last part of our show today we'll talk about just an interview happened with Mike. I think it's Mike Kadlick talking with Gerard Mayo. This made the news at least with players anywhere. I should say not players, but coverage in Arizona, anywhere from Arizona at PHNX to other people in New England. They said, hey, you got the number 3 pick. He said, we're going to draft the best player for a position that's very important. You put the pieces together. Most people are going to say, okay, you can say, hey, all positions are important. We'll draft the best player. That could mean a Marvin Harrison Jr. That could mean that maybe it's going to be a different place. He doesn't say that we're going to necessarily like trade down. Maybe you just say, oh, we're just going to trade down because we could get the best player. A lot of people took this and said, hey, best player for a position that's very important. That sounds like a quarterback, Marcos. He says you put the pieces together. Is Gerard Mayo saying that, like, hey, like, we're going quarterback at 3? That's the position we say is very important. No, that's the most important position. That feels like if that's the case, then does that mean the Cardinals fans can kind of breathe easy that Marvin Harrison Jr. may be falling to 4 after all?
I mean, that's where it starts and stops. If he has no, well, I don't know what to make about Mac Jones because Mac Jones had himself like a really good rookie season and he showed a lot of promise. They thought they just went ahead and got themselves another Tom Brady there. So I don't know if he has that confidence in him because he's worked with him. Obviously, they were in the same building. So if you have that opportunity to get somebody, I mean, the number 3 pick gets you, I believe, what is that? Quarterback from LSU? I keep forgetting what his name was. And I have respect for them. Jaden Daniels. Yeah, Jaden Daniels. If they have the opportunity to get Jaden Daniels and try to get this whole reset going and have Mac Jones sit for a couple of years and possibly maybe trade him away for a starting caliber QB at least they recover some of that draft capital, but they have to go all in. I mean, this is the coach. The coach has to hitch his wagon to the quarterback, and the quarterback's success is what leads to head coaching success.
Yeah, even some comments below from Pat's Buzz, at least, are like, hey, sounds like a QB. You could look at it several different ways, too. And there's a lot of people underneath that are like, oh, we'll trade up for neighbors. They don't settle for a QB. They need one. It's how you end up with Mac Jones. People saying Drake. All other people are like, okay, it's just going to be whoever's the best quarterback on the board. From what we've heard from Ben Albright, who we've had on the original Revenge of the Birds podcast before, I think that this is a spot where you've got 2 great quarterbacks. You've got one that won the Heisman this year with his legs and being able to have that deep accuracy. I think that you just kind of have to take a quarterback this year. The 2 teams that needed quarterback play the most, didn't have one who got hurt, such as Aaron Rodgers or Joe Burrow, were the Patriots and the Commanders this year. That's where I think that it's probably very likely that they could end up being a team that just, hey, whatever quarterback goes, we're just going to go ahead and take them. That'd be good news for Arizona. That'll wrap it up for our show today here. Marcos, at least, if you can go ahead and let people know where they can find you. As far as with your content, love to be able to also make sure they're following you on the X machine, as it were.
As usual, you guys can follow me at Pancake Soul, and you can find me on azsportsunderground.com.
Absolutely, and you'll be able to find me at Lake Murphy 7. Make sure you're following us at the Revenge of the Birds online, as well as Marco's talked about, AZ Sports Underground is making sure I said that right. And of course, follow the podcast at Redbird Reboot across anywhere where you can find your podcast, but especially here on our X platform. Thanks for tuning in. This has been the Redbird Rebooted. We've been rebooted now, so it's time for us to log off. Have a good day, everybody.
See you guys. Have a good day.